Akron, Ohio. November. Shaquille O'Neal held an old address in his hand, written by hand, on a worn piece of paper, the kind that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft. And with it came a memory. A man, 28 years ago, who asked no questions at all. He just bent down, picked up his measuring tape, and said, 3 days. You'll have your shoes. But when Shaq arrived, what he found was not a working shop. It was a bank notice, taped to the inside of the glass door, a debt of $19,800, and a 71-year-old man working alone, ever, since the day his only son never came home. The story could have ended there. But then Shaq looked inside and saw something he did not expect. A 14-year-old boy, bent over the workbench, hands trembling around a cobbler's awl, learning the trade on a pair of sample shoes that Shaq recognized from the very first stitch. They were his shoes, from 1996. What made the old cobbler keep them for 28 years? And the order for 500 pairs Shaq was about to place, would it arrive in time before the bank shut the shop down for good? 3 weeks before that November morning, Shaq had been sitting on the floor of his mother's closet. Lucille O'Neal had passed, and he had been putting off going through her things. He told himself it was the schedule, the calls, the foundation business. But the truth was simpler. He was not ready. When he finally opened the cardboard box she had left, he went slowly. One thing at a time. Photographs. A small Bible with a cracked spine. Letters bundled in rubber bands. A folded square of cloth he didn't open because he could feel it was fragile. Near the bottom, tucked inside a church program from September 1996, was the piece of paper. A name, an address, and one line in her handwriting. Don't forget Eugene. He sat with that for a long time. He knew who Eugene was. He had always known. Eugene Pickett had lived somewhere in the back of his mind for 28 years, real but unreached, the way some things stay when life keeps moving and you keep moving with it. But Lucille had not forgotten. She had written his name down and kept it with her Bible. She had kept it for the rest of her life. That told him everything he needed to know about what she wanted him to do. The year was 1996. Shaq was 24 years old, 3 seasons into the NBA. His face was on billboards. His name was in every sports conversation in the country. But that summer he was back in Akron for 2 weeks. No cameras, no appearances, visiting old friends, and trying to breathe before the season started again. 3 days before he had to fly back to Orlando, he pulled out his practice shoes. The sole of the left one had separated. A clean split across the ball of the foot. He pressed it together, and it fell open again. He called 3 shops. The first 2 said the same thing. No material for a size 23. One sounded apologetic. The other laughed a little, like the request was unreasonable. The third said bring it in. He drove over. The man at the counter turned the shoe over twice and handed it back. Sorry, can't do it. His mother was with him. She had driven him because she liked to be useful. She stood in the parking lot while he told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant she was already thinking ahead. Then she said, I know a man. Come on. 12 minutes across town. Down a street he had never been on. A brick corner building with a hand-painted sign above the door. Pickett and Son Shoe Repair. The letters were fading at the edges. One window had a crack running through it, sealed with a strip of clear tape. But the lights inside were on, and when the bell above the door rang, a man came out from the back. Eugene Pickett was around 50 years old, medium height, dark work apron, the hands of someone who used them every single day, wide palms, short nails, a small cut healing on the left index finger. He looked at Shaq, tilted his head back slightly to take, didn't say a word about it. He just said, what can I do for you? Shaq handed him the shoe. Eugene took it, turned it over, pressed the split with his thumb, held it up to the light near the window, pulled at the edges of the separation with 2 fingers, measuring how far it went. He did all of this without speaking. 40 seconds, maybe more. Then he walked to the back and came out with a tape measure. He measured from heel to toe. He measured the width. He measured the sole thickness at 3 points. He wrote everything on a notepad with a pencil stub so short it barely had lead left. He looked at the numbers, looked at the shoe again. He said, 3 days. You'll have them back. Not it. Them. He had already decided he was fixing both. Shaq said, "You sure?" Eugene said, "I said 3 days. Even." Calm. Not rude. Just a man telling you what was going to happen. 3 days later, Shaq came back. The left shoe looked like it had never been apart. The sole was clean and solid. The stitching along the edge was tight and even. And Eugene had reinforced the midsoles on both shoes. A strip of extra material bonded along the inside seam, where stress would build during play. He hadn't asked about that part. He had just seen it needed doing. Shaq asked how much. Eugene named a number. Too fair for the work involved. Shaq paid it. He wanted to say something that matched what he was feeling. He couldn't find the right words. He shook the man's hand. His mother shook it too. On the drive back, Lucille said, "That man never asked who you were." Shaq said, "I know." She said, "Somebody else would have taken a picture. Would have told the whole block. He just fixed your shoes." She drove for a moment without talking. Then she said, "That's rare. Don't forget it." He didn't. Not exactly. But 28 years passed the way years do. Seasons. Trades. Championships. Retirement. And Eugene Pickett stayed somewhere in the back of his mind, present but unreached. Until the cardboard box. Until the piece of paper. Until her handwriting. That familiar slant. Those looping letters, reaching across time. Don't forget Eugene. Shaq's assistant ran the address. Still listed. But no website. No reviews after 2019. The phone number went to a generic voicemail that never picked up. She said, "It might still be open." "Hard to say." He said, "I'm going to Akron." She said, "Hotel? Security?" He said, "Just a car." He flew commercial. Window seat. Gray hoodie. He kept his head down in the terminal, and no one bothered him. The woman in the middle seat fell asleep before takeoff and didn't move until they landed. He watched the clouds. Then he watched nothing. He let the noise of being himself fall away the way it sometimes could at altitude, when there was just air and light and distance between him and everything else. He thought about what his mother meant by "don't forget." She had met thousands of people in her life, but the ones she held onto were always the same kind. People who had been decent when it would have been easier not to be. People who helped without needing anything back. Eugene Pickett had fixed a young man's shoes and never asked who the young man was. Lucille had written his name down and kept it for the rest of her life. That was the whole story, and it was enough of a reason. The plane landed. He picked up a rental car and drove himself. He followed the GPS to the address on the paper. The street looked different than he remembered. Half the buildings were gone. Chain-link fences around empty lots. Patched pavement. Trees that had grown through sidewalk cracks and been cut back and grown again. But the shop was still there. Pickett and Son Shoe Repair. The hand-painted letters more faded now. Some nearly gone. The same cracked window. A newer strip of tape in the same spot. He pulled up across the street and sat with the engine running. Through the glass, he could see a notice taped to the inside of the door. White paper. Black printing. He had grown up around enough hard times to know exactly what that was without reading it. He turned off the engine. He crossed the street. He pushed the door open. The bell rang. Warm inside. The smell hit him immediately. Leather and adhesive and something metallic from the tools on the wall. The pegboard was the same. Same arrangement. More tools than he remembered. More were on the handles. A long work table against the far wall. An old man bent over it, working with a stillness so complete that Shaq went quiet without thinking about it. Beside him, on a lower stool, sat a boy. 14 maybe. Thin. Long fingers wrapped around a small tool he wasn't using. He was watching the old man work. The bell brought Eugene around. 71 years old now. White hair, close-cropped. Deep lines around the eyes. But his posture was straight. And his hands, when they came to rest on the edge of the table, were calm and completely still. He looked at Shaq. He said, "What size?" Shaq almost smiled. He pressed his lips together. He said, 23. The shop went quiet. Eugene looked at him the way he had looked at the shoe 28 years ago, measuring, taking it in, then recognition settling, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly arriving, like something that had been expected for a long time. He said, "I only ever made one pair in that size." Shaq said, "I know." The boy was looking back and forth between them. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the weight of it. Eugene set down his tool. Carefully, he said, sit down. Shaq pulled a stool from near the window, too small for him by a long measure. His knees came up near his chest. He sat on it anyway. Eugene said, I heard your mother passed. I'm sorry. Shaq said, she's the reason I'm here. Eugene nodded like that made complete sense. Then Shaq looked at the far end of the shelf along the wall. Among a row of customer repairs, a torn boot heel, a pair waiting for new soles, there was a pair of shoes set apart from the rest. Too big to belong to any ordinary customer. He stood. He walked to the shelf. He picked up the left shoe. He knew it immediately. Not just the size, the shape, the specific width at the ball of the foot, the midsole reinforcement he could feel under his thumb. The stitching along the outside edge, still tight after all this time. Someone had polished it recently. He could see the faint wax near the toe. He held it in both hands. He said, why did you keep this? Eugene looked at him steadily. He said, sit back down. I'll tell you. Eugene Pickett had one son. His name was Calvin. He had grown up inside this shop the way some children grow up inside churches or kitchens. The place simply became part of who he was. By 8 years old, he was sweeping and handing tools. By 12, he could resole a work boot. By 20, he could do everything Eugene could do. By 30, he was faster. They had talked about the future. Eugene would step back at 65. Calvin would run the shop. Maybe expand. Maybe teach. Eugene had a sister in Charlotte he'd been putting off visiting for 10 years. He had let himself think about that trip. What it would feel like to hand the keys to the person you trusted most. In March of 2019, Calvin was driving back from Columbus on I-76. A semi drifted into his lane on a wet section of highway. Calvin's car hit the guardrail and went underneath it. He was 38 years old. Eugene told this quietly, with the flat composure of a man who had lived inside the fact of it for 5 years and knew every corner of it. He didn't rush it. He didn't skip over any part of it, because the telling was one of the ways he kept Calvin present. After that, he kept the shop open. Not as a decision exactly. He just kept getting up every morning and coming in because it was what he had always done. And on the days when he didn't know what to do with himself, it helped to have somewhere to go and something to put his hands on. But the shop started losing ground. He was slower without Calvin. Customers noticed, not unkindly. Most said nothing directly. But word gets around a neighborhood. The old man is running it alone. He's still good, just slow. Some came back more than ever, out of loyalty. Others found somewhere faster. By summer of 2024, he was 3 months behind on the lease. He pulled money from savings. Then again, in September, the bank sent a notice. Then another. The third one was on the door. $19,800. 13 days remaining. Shaq sat on the small stool, knees up, too big for the seat, not moving, and listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt once. When Eugene finished, the shop held a particular kind of quiet. The kind that comes after hard things are said plainly. Then Shaq looked at the boy. Isaiah Pruitt was sitting very still. He had stopped pretending to hold his tool a while ago. His hands were in his lap. He was looking at nothing on the surface of the work table, but his jaw was set. Isaiah's father had worked alongside Calvin. Not his whole career. He had come on maybe 10 years before, helping during busy stretches. The two men had gotten along the way some people do when they share a way of working. Calvin would call when a big order came in. Isaiah's father would call Calvin when his truck needed attention. A friendship built around practical things, which meant it was solid. Isaiah's father had been in a second vehicle on I-76 that same day, following Calvin back to help unload supplies. He had also not come home. Isaiah had shown up at the shop 6 months ago. A Saturday morning in May, shop technically closed. He knocked. Eugene answered in his work apron. The boy said he wanted to learn the trade. Eugene said, I have no money to pay you. Isaiah said, I know. That's not why I'm here. Eugene looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, come in. They had worked together since that Saturday. Isaiah swept, handed tools, asked questions, good ones, the kind that showed he was thinking about the work, not just filling silence. Eugene had started teaching him the basics. How to read a sole for wear. How to feel the grain of leather. How to plan a stitch before you start, so you never have to correct it halfway through. Shaq looked at the work table. He said, What are you working on right now? Isaiah looked up. He said, copying the stitch pattern from the big shoe. Mr. Pickett wants me to understand the pattern before I touch the needle myself. Shaq said, how long have you been at it? Isaiah said, 3 weeks. Shaq said, are you close? Isaiah said, almost. The curve on the outside heel is the hard part. Shaq said, yeah, that's always the hard part. He said it like he knew. He didn't, but it felt true. Isaiah looked at him. Something in the boy's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. Now about the notice on the door. Shaq asked Eugene directly. He said, is 19800 the full number? Eugene said, plus 3 months left on the lease after that. Another 4200. Shaq did the math. He said nothing for a moment. He already knew what he wanted to do. The question was how to do it in a way Eugene would actually accept. He had grown up around men like Eugene. Newark and Akron had been full of them. Men who had built everything they had, from nothing, who received charity the way they received insults. Not because they were foolish, but because their self-respect was one of the few things they owned completely, and they were not going to hand it over. Not even when they were running out of road. You couldn't walk up to a man like that with a check. But a contract was different. Work performed. Money earned. That was a different thing entirely. He stepped outside to make a call. He told Eugene 2 minutes. He stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, the kind that had moisture underneath it, the kind that found your collar, and called his attorney in Nashville. He laid it out plainly. The attorney said, how many pairs? Shaq said, 500. The attorney said, timeline? Shaq said, first delivery in 90 days. The rest at whatever pace the supplier sets. I'm not putting pressure on the schedule. The attorney said, who's the supplier? Shaq said, Pickett and Son Shoe Repair, Akron, Ohio. There was a pause. The attorney started to say something about capacity. Shaq said, draw up the contract first. We'll work the logistics after. The attorney said, anything else? Shaq said, one more name on the document. Isaiah Pruitt, co-craftsman. He's the apprentice at the shop. I want him listed. A longer pause. The attorney said, he's 14. Shaq said, yes. The attorney said, that's unusual. Shaq said, I know. Do it anyway. He went back inside. He sat back down on the stool. He looked at Eugene. He told him about the foundation. His mother's name on the letterhead. The program they were building. 500 students graduating from schools in Newark, Akron, and New Orleans. 3 cities that had shaped his life. Each student receiving something made by hand. Something built to last. He said he wanted to give them shoes. Custom. Handmade. Leather. Made in Akron. The kind that would hold up for years. He said, the foundation can't give a charitable donation to a private business. Legally, that's not how it works. What I'm proposing is a purchase order. 500 pairs at fair market rate. My attorney will have the contract ready today. Eugene was quiet. The shop was very still. A car passed on the street outside. The tools on the pegboard shifted slightly from the vibration and settled again. Eugene said, why this shop? Shaq said, because 28 years ago you made a pair of shoes that nobody else would make. You didn't ask who I was. You just asked what I needed. And then you fixed both shoes when I only brought you one. He paused. He said, my mother remembered that her whole life. She wrote your name on a piece of paper and kept it inside her Bible. When I found it 3 weeks ago, it was the only thing in that box with a note attached. He let that sit. He said, I'm not here to pay a debt. I'm here because she kept being right about people, even after she was gone. Eugene looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Isaiah. Isaiah had gone very still. His face gave nothing away. But his hands, resting on his knees, were pressed flat. The way hands press flat when someone is working hard not to move. Eugene said, one condition. Shaq said, name it. Eugene said, every pair that goes out of this shop, with my name on it, Isaiah has to have been part of it. He touches the work. He knows what went into every pair. That's the condition. Shaq said, that's already in the contract. His name is on the document as co-craftsman. Eugene stopped. He said, say that again. Shaq said, Isaiah Pruitt, co-craftsman. His name is on the contract. He is part of this order. It was the first time that evening that something got through Eugene Pickett's composure. Not loudly, not dramatically, but it got through. He looked at Isaiah. Isaiah was looking at Shaq. The boy said, "You don't even know if I'm good enough yet." Shaq said, "No, but Eugene is still teaching you. A man like Eugene doesn't keep teaching someone he doesn't believe in." "That's all I need to know." Isaiah said nothing. He nodded. Once. Small. That was enough. The contract was signed 2 days later. Eugene's attorney reviewed it that morning. He said it was clean. Standard commercial terms. Fair market rate. 2 parties. Pickett and Son Shoe Repair and the Lucille O'Neill Foundation. He flagged the co-craftsman line. Eugene said, "Leave it in." His attorney left it in. That afternoon, Eugene walked to the front door. He peeled the bank notice off the glass. He folded it twice. He walked to the back of the shop and dropped it in the trash can by the door. He didn't say anything while he did it. He went back to his table and picked up what he had been working on before Shaq arrived. His hands found the leather. His eyes found the stitch. And he worked. Isaiah had been watching from across the room. When Eugene went to the stockroom to check supplies, Isaiah stood alone near the shelf for a while. He looked at the 2 large shoes. The left one Shaq had held. The right one Isaiah had been studying for 3 weeks. He reached out and picked up the right shoe. He turned it slowly. He ran his finger along the outside heel, the curve. He could feel the seam, where the sole met the upper. Where the material had been doubled, because someone, 28 years ago, had seen that the stress would be greatest right there. He held it for about a minute. Then he set it back, exactly where it had been. He went back to his stool. He picked up his notepad. He started drawing the curve again, from memory, the same curve, the same heel, the same hard part he had been working on for 3 weeks. He drew it until the lines looked right. Then he drew it again, to be sure. 3 days before he flew home, Shaq came back to the shop one more time. He hadn't planned to. He was driving past on his way across town when he saw the street and turned without thinking about it. Old instinct, maybe. The way you slow down near something you're not finished with yet. He pulled up outside. Through the window, he could see Eugene at the work table. Isaiah was beside him, closer than before. Moved up. Eugene was talking. While he worked, Shaq could see his lips moving, and Isaiah was watching his hands, not his face. That was the right way to learn something like this. You watch the hands. Then Eugene did the stitch himself. Slow and deliberate. Handed the tool to Isaiah. Isaiah tried it. Eugene pointed at something. Isaiah tried again. Better. Shaq could tell even from the street. He pushed the door open. The bell rang. Both of them looked up. Eugene lifted his chin. Isaiah said, "Morning." Just morning. No ceremony. Like Shaq was someone who came in on Tuesdays. Like everything that had happened in the past 4 days had already started settling into something ordinary and workable. Shaq liked that more than he could say. He said, "Don't let me interrupt." Eugene said, "You're not interrupting." He waited, the way he did, giving space without rushing. Shaq looked at the shelf. The 2 large shoes. Still there, right where they had been. He said, "You're going to leave them there?" Eugene glanced at the shelf. He thought about it for a second. He said, "Yes, I think they stay where they are." Simple. Final. The way he said most things. Shaq said, "Good." He didn't explain why he thought so. He didn't need to. Isaiah was looking at the shoes too. He said, "Mr. O'Neill, when the students get the shoes, will they know where they came from?" Shaq said, "There'll be a tag inside. It'll say handmade in Akron, Ohio, and it'll have the name of the shop." Isaiah said, "But will they know?" He paused. All of it? He meant Calvin. He meant his father. He meant the notice on the glass, and the 13 days, and a piece of paper kept inside a church program for 28 years. Shaq said, "No, they won't know that part." Isaiah nodded slowly. He seemed to be turning it over. Then he said, "That's okay, I think. They'll just have the shoes." Shaq said, "Yeah, they'll have the shoes." Isaiah picked up his tool. He went back to work. Eugene was watching the boy. That expression again, the one that had no clean name. Something between pride and grief and something else that didn't translate into words. Shaq stayed about 20 minutes. He sat on the small stool. He watched Eugene show Isaiah 2 more small, specific, technical things. He watched Isaiah do each one twice and get it right the second time. When he left, he shook Eugene's hand. The old man's grip was what it had always been, solid and unhurried, the grip of someone who had nothing left to prove and knew it. He had brought coffee this time. He set a cup on the corner of Eugene's work table, without saying anything about it. Eugene nodded without looking up. Isaiah got a cup too. The boy looked at it, then at Shaq, then picked it up and held it, with both hands the way young people hold hot things, like they're not sure yet how to manage the temperature. They worked like that for a while. Eugene talking in low, specific sentences. Isaiah asking things once, listening hard, not asking the same thing twice. The tools moving from one hand to the other. The leather responding slowly, the way leather does when you're patient with it. Shaq had seen great craftsmen before. He had been around great athletes, great musicians, great surgeons. The thing they all had in common was not speed. It was certainty. Eugene's hands were certain. They knew where they were going before they got there. Isaiah's hands were not certain yet. They were careful, which is a different thing. But careful was the right place to start. Certainty came later, after the hands had done a thing enough times to stop thinking about it. He watched Isaiah set a stitch. It was imperfect, slightly too close to the edge on the right side. Eugene saw it. He said one word. Isaiah looked, understood, adjusted. The next one was better. The one after that was better still. Eugene had a photograph of Calvin on the shelf above the tool wall. Not framed, just tucked between two supply boxes, leaning against the pegboard. A snapshot from maybe 10 years ago. Calvin standing at the work table, arms crossed, laughing at something off camera. He wore an apron exactly like his father's. Shaq had noticed it the first day. He hadn't said anything. Some things you notice and leave alone. But Eugene saw him looking at it now. He said, he had my hands. Exactly my hands. He said it the way you say something. That is both the worst thing and the best thing, both at once, and you have learned to hold both together, because you don't get to choose. Shaq said, what was he like? Eugene said, funny. That surprised people. They expected serious, because of the work. But Calvin was funny. He could make anybody laugh. He paused. He said, he never left a job half done. Never. Even when it was late, and there was just one seam left. He would finish it. He looked at his hands on the table. He said, that's what I try to teach Isaiah. Not the stitching. Anybody can learn stitching. I'm trying to teach him to finish the thing. Isaiah, on his stool, kept working. But his pencil slowed for just a second, then continued. While Eugene was in the stockroom checking supplies, Shaq and Isaiah were briefly alone in the shop. Isaiah didn't look up from his notepad, but after a moment he said, my dad used to say this shop smelled like honest work. Shaq said, what did he mean by that? Isaiah said, he meant you could tell the difference between a place that did things right and a place that just did things fast. He said shortcuts have their own smell. He said this place didn't have it. He kept drawing the curve on his notepad. He said, I didn't understand what he meant when I was little. I thought he just liked the smell of leather. He looked at what he had drawn. He said, I think I know what he meant now. Shaq looked at the boy for a moment. He didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to add. He said goodbye to Isaiah. The boy raised a hand without looking up. He was concentrating. Shaq smiled. He went out. The bell rang. The door closed behind him. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. November in Akron, gray and cold and quiet. Somewhere down the block a dog barked at something invisible. He walked to the car. He got in. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the piece of paper. Lucille's handwriting. The address. The sentence. Don't forget Eugene. He read it one more time. He had spent 28 years carrying a debt he didn't know how to pay. Not because he had forgotten. He hadn't. Not entirely. But because he hadn't known what the payment looked like until now. It didn't look like a check. It didn't look like a headline. It looked like a contract with two names on it. One 71 years old, one 14, and 500 pairs of shoes being made slowly, carefully, by hands that knew what they were doing and hands that were still learning. He folded the paper along its old creases. He put it back in his pocket, closer to his chest this time. He started the engine. He pulled away from the curb without looking back at the shop. He didn't need to look back. He knew what was there. A warm room, a work table, an old man with steady hands, a boy drawing a curve until he gets it right, and two large shoes on a shelf, polished and cared for, going nowhere. On the flight home, he sat by the window. Akron was spread out below him in the early morning gray. Then the clouds came up, and he couldn't see it anymore. He thought about his mother. He thought about the summer afternoon in 1996, when she drove him 12 minutes across town and walked him into a shop he had never been to meet a man she had decided was worth trusting. He had been thinking about his shoes that day. Just his shoes. She had been teaching him something. He hadn't understood it then. He had been 24 and thinking about the season and the practice and the next 3 days. He understood it now. Some people measure what they give you. They calculate it. They decide what you're worth, and they give you exactly that amount. And then there are people who just look at what you need. Eugene Pickett had looked at a split sole on an impossible size and said 3 days. He hadn't asked who the shoes belonged to. He hadn't asked what they were for. He hadn't asked whether the job was worth his time. He had just looked at what was in front of him and done his best work. That was it. That was the whole thing. That was what Lucille had seen in 40 seconds inside a small shop on a side street in Akron in the summer of 1996. That was what she had written down. That was what she had kept. And now 500 students in 3 cities would receive something made by hands that worked the same way, without asking, without calculating, without deciding in advance what someone was worth. They would not know any of that. They would just have the shoes. He thought about what his mother used to say when people asked her how she had raised 3 children mostly on her own, moving from city to city, following a career that had not yet decided to be successful. She would say, "I didn't raise them to be comfortable. I raised them to be decent." He had heard that many times growing up. It had sounded like a thing parents said, a phrase, something to put on a card. He understood now it was a method. Decency was not a feeling. It was a practice. It was something you did when nobody was watching and nothing was guaranteed. It was Eugene Pickett measuring a size 23 shoe with a pencil stub because the work deserved to be measured right, even when the customer was a nobody and the money was small and the material was going to be hard to find. It was Isaiah Pruitt showing up on a Saturday morning with no money asked and no reason given except that he wanted to learn something real from someone who knew it. It was Lucille O'Neill writing a man's name on a piece of paper and keeping it for 28 years inside a church program because she had recognized something worth remembering, and she had decided her son should remember it too. 3 people, 3 different kinds of decency, all of them pointing in the same direction. He pressed his hand flat against his chest, over the pocket where the paper was. He felt it there. The plane leveled off. The sky above the clouds was clear and wide and very bright. Shaq closed his eyes. Somewhere below him, in a warm shop on a quiet street, a boy was bent over a workbench drawing a curve that was hard. Drawing it again and again until it looked right. Because that's how you learn a thing that's worth knowing. You don't stop until it's right.